Could we share this world?
There are places in the American wilderness where the rules don't quite apply, where the forest goes silent in ways that make your skin crawl, where things move through the trees that shouldn't exist according to every biology textbook ever written. Jake Anderson didn't believe in any of that supernatural crap. Past tense, didn't. Because what happened in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana turned a skeptic into someone who checks over his shoulder every time he walks into the woods. This is that story. Now, I need you to understand something about Jake. This wasn't some weekend warrior playing at being an outdoorsman. The guy had been hunting these mountains for 37 years. Started when he was 12, with his grandfather's beat-up rifle, learning to track deer through lodgepole pine and granite ridges that stretched endlessly toward the Canadian border. He knew every game trail, every water source, every wind pattern in his particular valley. The man could read the forest like you read a book, which is why what he found on his trail camera didn't just surprise him. It fundamentally broke his understanding of reality. October 20th. That's when Jake finally checked the footage. He'd set up his Reckonix trail camera 3 weeks earlier at a prime intersection where multiple game trails converged. Good spot. He'd been seeing fresh elk sign for weeks, big bull tracks, rubs on the aspens, wallows near the creek, the kind of sign that gets a hunter's blood pumping. He'd positioned that camera carefully, about 20 feet back from the trail, camouflaged with pine boughs and angled to catch anything moving through the bottleneck. What it caught changed everything. But before we get into the nightmare fuel that was on that SD card, let me tell you why this matters. Because this isn't just some grainy blob squatch footage that could be anything. This wasn't a dark shape disappearing behind trees, or some questionable photo that might be a guy in a costume. What Jake recorded was 33 minutes of crystal clear, high-definition documentation of something that scientifically shouldn't exist, doing things that made his blood run cold. And here's where it gets really interesting. The creature didn't just wander through the frame. It performed a demonstration, showed skills that would take a human decades to master. Did it all while staring at the camera like it knew exactly what it was doing. Yeah, we're going there. Now, before you click away thinking this is just another Bigfoot story, I need you to stick with me. Because what Jake witnessed wasn't about whether these things exist. That question got answered in the first 60 seconds of footage. What this story is really about is what happens when something that's been hiding in plain sight for generations decides it's time for humans to know the truth. And more importantly, why it chose Jake as the messenger. So if you're into real mystery, actual unexplained phenomena, and stories that'll make you think twice about camping alone, you're in the right place. Hit that like button because trust me, you're going to want to remember where you heard this. Drop a comment and let me know if you've ever had that feeling in the woods, you know the one I'm talking about. That sensation of being watched by something you can't see. And subscribe, because this story has layers that go way deeper than just one creature in one forest. This is about intelligence, in places we've convinced ourselves don't have it. All right, let's get into it. Jake Anderson lived in a cabin about 40 miles outside of Missoula, Montana. Not some fancy vacation property, but an actual lived-in place he'd built himself over the course of 3 years back in the 90s. Single room, wood stove, no cell service, propane for the fridge. The kind of place where you go to get away from everything, except Jake never left. This was home. He'd worked as a hunting guide for 12 years after high school, teaching tourists from back east how to field dress their kills without ruining the meat. Good money in the fall, and it kept him in the mountains, where he wanted to be anyway. Eventually saved enough to buy 40 acres, backing up against Forest Service land, which meant he essentially had access to thousands of square miles of wilderness right out his back door. The man knew what he was doing out there. That's important to understand. This wasn't some random dude who watched a couple YouTube videos and thought he could track game. Jake had forgotten more about these mountains than most people would ever learn. He could tell you what a deer had eaten based on its droppings, could age a track to within a few hours by how the edges had dried, could predict animal movement based on weather patterns and moon phases, which made what he found so much worse. Because if someone like Jake couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it away with 37 years of experience, then what the hell were the rest of us supposed to think? October had been good that year. Early snow on the peaks, but the lower elevations were still accessible. Elk were moving, shifting toward their wintering grounds, but not in any hurry about it. Jake had been tracking one particular bull for 3 seasons. Massive 6-point, probably 800 pounds, with a distinctive split in its left antler from an old fight. The kind of trophy that hunters dream about, but rarely get. He'd set up his trail camera on September 28th. 6 AA batteries, 64 gig SD card, set to record 30-second video clips whenever motion was detected. Modern trail cameras are pretty damn sophisticated. Invisible infrared flash, nearly instant trigger speed, weather-sealed housing. This particular model could capture high-definition video in almost complete darkness. Jake positioned it at what hunters call a funnel point, place where the terrain naturally forced animal traffic into a narrow corridor. To the north, a steep granite face that nothing was climbing without wings. To the south, a dense thicket of deadfall from a wildfire 3 years back. In between, a nice clear game trail worn down to bare dirt by decades of elk and deer traffic. Put a camera there, and you'd capture everything moving through that section of the valley. He checked it once in early October, swapped the SD card, and was pleased to see plenty of activity. Lots of daws and fawns, a few smaller bulls, even a black bear that had gotten curious and sniffed around the camera housing. Normal stuff. Good sign that the location was solid. The second card he pulled on October 20th. That was the one. Jake hiked the 4 miles in just after dawn, carrying his usual day pack: water, emergency kit, GPS unit, spare batteries. Beautiful morning, temperature maybe 45 degrees. Sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The aspens were turning, gold and orange against the dark green of the pines. Weather like that, it's hard not to feel good about life. He found the camera right where he'd left it. Or rather, he found where the camera had been. The mounting bracket was still attached to the pine tree, about 6 feet up the trunk. But the camera housing was gone. Just gone. No pieces scattered on the ground. No evidence of a bear attack or ravens investigating something shiny. The security cable he'd used had been snapped clean through, not frayed or chewed. Snapped. What the hell? Jake said to the empty forest. He circled the tree, looking for any sign of what had happened. No claw marks, no disturbed ground, nothing to suggest a struggle or a fall. The camera had been removed deliberately and carried away. Now, camera theft is a thing in the backcountry. Happens more than you'd think. But they're usually stolen by people who know what they're worth. A good trail camera runs $300 to $400. Those thieves take them to sell. They don't break the mounting and then hike miles into the wilderness to do it. Jake expanded his search, moving in widening circles around the tree. His mind was already running through scenarios. Maybe the bracket had failed and the camera had fallen, then been carried off by a scavenger. Maybe another hunter had found it and would turn it into the Forest Service. Maybe. He found the SD card about 100 yards downstream, near the creek. It was sitting on a flat boulder, right in the middle. Not wedged in a crack, not half buried in pine needles. Placed, like someone had set it there, deliberately, where it couldn't be missed. Jake picked it up, turning it over in his fingers. No damage, no scratches or bite marks. Just a standard SD card, dusty but intact. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He spent another 2 hours searching for the camera housing, but it had vanished completely. Eventually, he gave up and hiked back to his truck, the SD card in his shirt pocket like it was burning against his chest. The drive home gave him time to think, and none of his thoughts were comfortable. Someone or something had removed his camera with enough force to snap a steel cable. Then it had taken the camera, but left the memory card behind, positioned where it would be found. That wasn't random. That was intentional. The question was why? Jake's cabin was cold when he got back. He got the wood stove going, made a pot of coffee that could strip paint, and sat down at his kitchen table with his laptop. His hands were steady as he inserted the SD card into the reader, but his mind was racing. The card contained 213 video files. He started with the most recent, dated October 15th at 3:42 in the morning. The first few seconds showed an empty game trail, moonlight filtering through the pine canopy. Normal. Then the big bull elk stepped into frame. Jake leaned closer to the screen. There it was. The split-antlered bull he'd been hunting. The animal moved cautiously, head up, testing the air. Something had spooked it. You could see it in the body language, every muscle tensed, ready to bolt. The elk's eyes were wide, showing white, ears pinned forward towards something beyond the camera's range. "What's got you nervous, buddy?" Jake muttered. The elk took 2 tentative steps forward, then froze completely. The attack came from the left side of the frame, a blur of dark motion, impossibly fast for something so large. Jake's coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. The creature hit the elk low, wrapping massive arms around the animal's chest, driving it to the ground with devastating force. The elk's legs buckled, 800 pounds of wild animal brought down in seconds by something even larger and infinitely stronger. Jake clicked pause, his hand shaking slightly. He set down the coffee mug before he dropped it. "No," he said to his empty cabin. "No way." He clicked play again. The creature maintained its grip on the elk as the animal thrashed, powerful legs kicking frantically. But the struggle lasted only moments. The creature adjusted its hold, and through his laptop speakers, Jake heard the distinctive crack of the elk's neck breaking. He'd heard that sound before, when processing his own kills, but never delivered by bare hands. What happened next transformed Jake's disbelief into something approaching terror. The creature didn't behave like an animal. It didn't tear into the carcass with teeth and claws, didn't feed in the frenzied manner of a predator. Instead, it sat back on its haunches and began to work methodically, using its hands with deliberate precision. It started at the elk's hindquarters, its fingers finding the exact spot where the hide attached to the fascia. It worked slowly, carefully, peeling the skin back in long strips, exactly the way Jake had been taught by his grandfather. This wasn't random violence or animal hunger. This was skilled butchering performed by something that understood anatomy and meat processing. Jake watched in stunned silence as the creature worked. He zoomed in on its hands. They were enormous, easily twice the size of his own, but the fingers were long and surprisingly dexterous. No claws, just thick fingernails that it used to score the hide before peeling it away from the underlying muscle. The technique was flawless. Not a single tear in the hide, no wasted meat. Better work than Jake had seen from most hunters. The creature's face remained largely hidden as it worked, bent over the carcass in concentration. Dark matted hair covered most of its features, but Jake caught glimpses of a pronounced brow ridge, a broad flat nose, lips that were almost human but not quite. The overall impression was of something caught between human and ape, but larger than either. Much larger. It separated the quarters with surgical precision, finding the joints and dislocating them cleanly. No tools, no knives, just an intimate knowledge of anatomy and massive strength. It worked in complete silence, the only sounds coming from the process itself, the wet separation of hide from meat, the pop of joints dislocating. Jake had field-dressed hundreds of animals in his lifetime. What he was watching represented decades of accumulated knowledge and skill. This creature understood meat processing better than most professional butchers, but it was the organizational behavior that really got to him. The creature didn't just butcher randomly. It created distinct piles, organizing the meat by type and quality. Back straps in one pile, tenderloins carefully separated, hindquarters quartered and stacked. Even the bones were sorted, clearly intended for specific purposes. This wasn't feeding behavior. This was food processing on an industrial scale. "Holy shit," Jake whispered. 23 minutes into the sequence, The creature began wrapping portions of meat in pieces of the elk's own hide. Long strips of backstrap rolled carefully and tied with what appeared to be sinew from the animal's legs. Jake recognized the technique from his reading about traditional Native American hunting methods. Portable meat that could last for weeks. The creature worked with the steady rhythm of long practice. No hesitation, no trial and error. Every movement was economical and purposeful. This wasn't the first time it had done this. Jake was watching something with years, possibly decades, of experience in processing large game animals. As the creature worked, Jake began to notice other details. The forest had gone completely silent. No owl calls, no rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush, no wind through the pine needles. Even the usual night sounds of insects had ceased. Everything in the immediate area had either fled or was hiding, waiting for the predator to move on. The creature's size became more apparent as it moved around the carcass. When it stood to reposition itself, its head rose nearly to the height of nearby pine branches. Jake estimated its height at 9 feet, possibly more. Its shoulders were massive, easily 4 feet across, and its arms hung nearly to its knees. The proportions were all wrong for a human, more ape-like, but far larger than any known primate. Despite its size, the creature moved with surprising grace. No wasted motion, no clumsiness. When it needed to turn the elk carcass, it did so effortlessly, manipulating 800 pounds of dead weight as if it were a small deer. The display of raw physical power was sobering. Jake realized that nothing in these mountains, no bear or mountain lion, would pose any threat to something this large and strong. The creature was the apex predator here, and everything else in the forest knew it. At the 31-minute mark, the creature began loading the processed meat into what appeared to be a crude but effective carrying system. It had fashioned a pack frame from elk bones, lashed together with sinew, and was methodically loading the wrapped meat portions. The engineering was simple but effective, designed to carry a substantial load over rough terrain. Jake paused the video and walked to his kitchen window. Outside, dusk was settling over the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the peaks in shades of purple and gold. The familiar view should have been comforting. Instead, Jake found himself scanning the tree line with new wariness. Somewhere out there, something was living in the forest that he'd never suspected. Something large enough and smart enough to hunt elk, process them completely, and transport the meat without leaving obvious sign. He returned to his laptop and clicked play. The creature finished packing the meat, then began cleaning up the kill site with methodical thoroughness. It scattered the remaining bones, buried the offal, and even spread pine needles over the blood-stained ground. Within minutes, the site looked almost natural. Just another spot in the forest where a scavenger might have found a winter-killed carcass. The cleanup process revealed another disturbing level of intelligence. The creature understood evidence, knew that its activities might be discovered and investigated. It was actively concealing its presence, eliminating sign that might reveal its hunting patterns or location. This wasn't just intelligence, it was sophisticated reasoning about future consequences. Jake's mouth went dry. As the creature shouldered its pack and prepared to leave, it moved directly toward the trail camera. Jake's heart rate spiked. The creature had known about the camera the entire time. It had deliberately positioned itself to be recorded, working within the frame as if putting on a performance. The creature stopped 10 feet from the camera and looked directly into the lens. For the first time, Jake got a clear view of its face. The features were definitely humanoid, but scaled up and subtly wrong. The eyes were large and dark, showing an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and calculating. The nose was broad and flat, the mouth wider than human normal. The overall expression was one of calm evaluation, as if the creature was studying whoever might eventually watch this footage. For nearly 30 seconds, the creature stared directly at the camera. Jake felt an irrational chill run down his spine, as if those dark eyes were looking directly at him across 5 days of time. The creature's gaze was steady and unblinking, and Jake had the uncomfortable sensation that it was trying to communicate something. Not aggression or threat, but a kind of measured warning. Then the creature raised one massive hand and reached toward the camera. The image shook violently, spinning and tumbling as the camera was ripped from its mounting. The last clear frame showed the forest floor rushing up. Then the screen went black. Jake sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. He clicked to the next file, static. He clicked through a dozen more, all static or corrupted. The creature had taken the camera, but preserved the SD card. More than that, it had placed the card where Jake would find it. This wasn't accidental exposure, it was intentional revelation. But why? Jake spent the rest of the night watching and re-watching the footage, looking for any explanation that didn't require accepting the impossible. By 3 a.m, his eyes burned and his coffee pot was empty, but the evidence remained undeniable. Something was living in these mountains that challenged everything he thought he knew about the natural world. The implications were staggering. If this creature existed, it wasn't alone. The sophisticated hunting and processing techniques suggested learned behavior passed down through generations. This was a viable population with its own culture and survival strategies. They were sharing these mountains with humans, but remaining hidden through intelligence and careful behavior modification. Jake realized that many of his unexplained experiences over the years suddenly made new sense. Elk carcasses found cleanly butchered and partially consumed with no sign of the predator responsible. Game trails that seemed to shift inexplicably. Animals avoiding areas where they'd previously been abundant. The occasional feeling of being watched while hunting alone. Glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision that he'd attributed to other wildlife. How long had they been here, watching him? How many times had he walked past them without knowing? The thought made his skin crawl. Dawn broke cold and gray. Jake stood on his porch, scanning the forest with bloodshot eyes. Somewhere in those mountains, the creature was probably settling in for the day. Its food stores secured through hunting skills that had evolved over generations. Jake had always been a man who trusted evidence over speculation. He believed in what he could see, touch, and prove. The footage on his laptop was all three, but accepting the evidence meant accepting that his entire understanding of these mountains had been wrong, that he'd been sharing them with something that possessed intelligence he couldn't begin to fathom. He went back inside and saved multiple copies of the footage to different storage devices, then uploaded an encrypted copy to a cloud storage service he barely knew how to use. Whatever he decided to do with the information, he wanted to ensure it wouldn't be lost. The creature had taken considerable risk to preserve this evidence, and Jake felt obligated to protect what it had chosen to reveal. Then he did what any self-respecting researcher would do in the internet age. He started Googling. What he found made him feel simultaneously better and worse. The internet contained hundreds, maybe thousands, of accounts describing encounters with large bipedal creatures in remote wilderness areas across North America. Most were dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. People seeing bears standing on hind legs. People mistaking stumps for something alive. People making up stories for attention. But reading them with his new knowledge, Jake found disturbing consistencies in the descriptions. Multiple witnesses described creatures with the same general physical characteristics. 8 to 10 feet tall, massively broad shoulders, long arms, dark hair covering most of the body. The same calm intelligence. The same apparent understanding of human behavior and technology. Several accounts mentioned finding game animals that had been processed with unusual skill. Others described discovering evidence of systematic meat preservation in remote areas, twisted saplings, stacked rocks in patterns, stick structures that seemed deliberately constructed. The pattern suggested a population that was far more widespread and organized than anyone had suspected. Jake found forums where people shared their experiences, debated evidence, and argued about the implications. Some were clearly true believers, seeing Bigfoot in every shadow. Others were skeptics, demanding proof that no eyewitness account could provide. A few were like Jake, people with backcountry experience who'd seen something that didn't fit their understanding of the natural world and didn't know what to do with that information. He read for hours, taking notes, bookmarking pages, academic papers about primate behavior, indigenous legends from tribes across the Pacific Northwest and Rockies, historical accounts from early settlers and trappers, government reports about unexplained incidents in national forests. The deeper he dug, the more he realized this wasn't a new phenomenon. People had been seeing these creatures for centuries. The difference was that most evidence remained anecdotal, easy to dismiss as folklore or imagination. Jake had something different. He had 33 minutes of high-definition video showing a creature that shouldn't exist, performing tasks that required human-level intelligence and skill. The question was what the hell to do with it. He considered his options. He could report the footage to wildlife authorities, potentially triggering a scientific investigation that would transform the area forever. Teams of researchers descending on his valley, disrupting the delicate balance that had apparently existed for decades or longer. He could share it with the cryptozoological community, adding credible evidence to decades of speculation. But that would mean going public, dealing with attention he neither wanted nor needed. Interviews, questions, scrutiny of every aspect of his life and experience. Or he could keep it private, honoring what he sensed was a privileged communication from something that had chosen to trust him with its secret. The creature's behavior suggested it was testing human reaction, using Jake as a representative sample to gauge whether disclosure was safe or advisable. The responsibility was enormous. Jake's response might influence whether these creatures remained hidden or began revealing themselves more broadly. His decision could affect the survival of a species that had successfully avoided human interference for generations. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders. Jake made lunch, canned soup, and stale bread, and ate without tasting it. His mind kept returning to the creature's face, to that measured evaluation in its eyes. What had it been thinking? What did it want Jake to do with this information? He considered the demonstration itself. The creature hadn't just allowed itself to be filmed. It had performed, showed its capabilities in a way that was clearly deliberate. The butchering skills, the organization, the cleanup, the direct look at the camera, all of it was calculated. It was sending a message. But what message? Perhaps it was a warning, a demonstration of capability designed to discourage human activity in its territory. Look what I can do. Stay out of my forest. Or maybe it was an attempt at contact, a way of revealing its presence to gauge human reaction. We exist. We're intelligent. How do you respond to that information? The creature's calm demeanor and careful cleanup suggested it wasn't immediately hostile, but the demonstration of strength was unmistakably clear. It could take down an 800-pound elk with its bare hands. It could certainly pose a threat to a human if it chose to. Jake thought about his upcoming hunting season. He had tags for elk and deer, had been planning to spend November in the backcountry tracking that big bull, except the big bull was gone, processed and packed away with skill that exceeded his own. Could he still hunt these mountains, knowing what he now knew? Should he? The relationship between human and environment had been permanently redefined. Jake was no longer the apex predator here. He was sharing the mountains with something that understood them better than he did, something that had been here longer and had prior claim to the territory. His hunting success existed only at its sufferance. That was a hell of a thing to accept. Jake spent the afternoon splitting firewood, needing the physical activity to clear his head. The familiar rhythm of swinging the maul, the satisfying crack of rounds splitting clean, the pile of wood growing steadily, it was therapeutic. But even as he worked, his eyes kept drifting to the tree line, looking for movement, looking for any sign that he was being watched. The forest looked the same as always. Pine and aspen, granite outcrops, the distant peaks snow-capped and pristine, beautiful and wild and apparently full of secrets he'd never suspected. By evening, Jake had made a decision. He would return to the mountains, but not as a hunter. He would go back to the spot where the camera had been placed, would look for any additional sign, would try to understand what had happened and why the creature had chosen to reveal itself to him. He loaded his pack with essentials, water, food, emergency shelter, first aid kit, GPS unit, his good headlamp, and after some hesitation, his rifle, not because he wanted to use it, but because being unarmed in backcountry felt fundamentally wrong. As he checked his gear, Jake realized his hands were shaking slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the significance of what he was about to do. He was deliberately seeking contact with something that had remained hidden from human detection for generations. The creature had initiated communication. Now Jake was responding. He had no idea what would happen next, but sitting in his cabin obsessing over the footage wasn't accomplishing anything. If he wanted answers, he'd have to go find them. Jake left before dawn the next morning, his truck bouncing along the rough Forest Service road as darkness gave way to grey pre-dawn light. The October air was cold enough that his breath fogged in the cab, and fresh snow dusted the high peaks. Winter was coming. The creatures would be preparing for it, securing food stores, finding shelter. The timing of the demonstration made sense now. This was their busy season, and Jake had placed his camera right in the middle of their territory. He parked at the trailhead and shouldered his pack, the familiar weight settling comfortably across his hips. The rifle slung over his shoulder felt heavier than usual, like its presence was judging him. The hike to the camera location took just under 2 hours. Jake moved cautiously, paying attention to everything around him. Every broken twig, every disturbed patch of ground, every bird call that seemed out of place. The forest felt different now. Not threatening exactly, but charged with possibility. Like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. Jake reached the pine tree where his camera had been mounted. The broken bracket still hung from the trunk, a reminder of the force that had snapped steel cable like thread. He began a systematic search of the area, moving in expanding grids, looking for anything unusual. Tracks, scat, disturbed vegetation, anything that might provide additional information about the creature or its movements. An hour into his search, he found something. About 50 yards from the camera site, near a cluster of granite boulders, someone or something had arranged a series of rocks in a deliberate pattern, not random scatter, but stacked and positioned with clear intent. Jake crouched to examine them. The rocks formed a rough semicircle, with 3 larger stones placed at specific intervals. In the center, someone had placed a single perfect pine cone, upright and balanced. This wasn't natural formation, this was communication. But what did it mean? Jake studied the arrangement from multiple angles, trying to understand its significance. Was it a warning? An invitation? A territorial marker? He pulled out his phone and took several photos, then sat back on his heels, thinking, the creature had known he would come back. It had expected him to search the area. This had been left for him to find. The question was whether he should respond. Jake looked around at the silent forest. Somewhere out there, he was probably being watched. The creature or others like it, evaluating his reaction, deciding whether he was worthy of further contact. After a long moment, Jake reached down and carefully added a 4th stone to the arrangement, placing it opposite the 3 existing ones, completing the circle. Then he stood and spoke to the empty forest. I saw your message. I understand you're here. I'm not here to cause problems, just trying to understand. His voice sounded small in the vastness of the wilderness, swallowed by the density of trees and distance. No response, just the sigh of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a raven. Jake waited for several minutes, but nothing happened. Eventually, he continued his search, documenting everything with photos and detailed notes in his field journal. He found 2 more anomalies, a structure made from twisted saplings that formed an arch over a deer trail, and a series of what appeared to be territorial markers, piles of stones with specific patterns that repeated every few hundred yards. All of it suggested intelligence and intent. All of it suggested a sophisticated understanding of the landscape and the ability to manipulate it for specific purposes. Jake spent the entire day in the area, searching and observing. He ate lunch sitting on a granite outcrop overlooking the valley, his rifle across his knees, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched never left him. As afternoon shadows began lengthening, Jake prepared to head back to his truck. He'd gathered a lot of information, but no answers. The creature remained hidden, watching but not revealing itself. Jake returned to the rock circle one last time before leaving. The fourth stone he'd added was gone. In its place, someone had left a single raven feather, perfectly centered in the arrangement. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He picked up the feather, holding it carefully. It was fresh, the black iridescence still vibrant, no sign of weathering or damage. This hadn't been here when he'd left the circle hours earlier. Something had removed his stone and replaced it with this. Jake turned slowly, scanning the surrounding forest. Still nothing. Still, that overwhelming sense of being observed by eyes he couldn't detect. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then he pocketed the feather, shouldered his pack, and began the long hike back to his truck. The drive home gave him time to process what had happened. The creature had responded to his gesture, acknowledged his presence, engaged in what was unmistakably a form of communication. The question was what came next. Back at his cabin, Jake laid out everything he'd collected: photos of the rock arrangements, the feather, pages of notes about what he'd found. He added it all to the growing file of information about the creature and its behavior. Then he did something he'd been avoiding. He searched for active researchers studying these creatures, people who might be able to provide context for what he was experiencing. What he found was a mixed bag. Some were serious scientists who'd risked their reputations to study a phenomenon that mainstream academia refused to acknowledge. Others were enthusiasts with more passion than methodology. And some were outright con artists, looking to exploit believers. But one name kept appearing in multiple credible sources: Dr. Sarah Martinez, a primatologist who'd spent 15 years researching reports of unknown hominids in North American wilderness areas. She was based out of Portland, Oregon, and had published several papers in fringe journals about evidence that suggested the existence of a previously unknown species. Jake read her work late into the night. She was careful, methodical, and refused to make claims beyond what the evidence supported. But she was also clear in her belief that something was out there, that science had failed to properly investigate. Her most recent paper discussed evidence of tool use and structured behavior in unidentified hominids, citing dozens of cases where witnesses had reported finding deliberately constructed arrangements of natural materials in remote areas. Just like what Jake had found. He pulled up her university contact information and stared at it for a long time, his cursor hovering over the email field. Contacting her would mean sharing his footage, would mean bringing an outsider into the situation, would mean potentially triggering exactly the kind of attention he'd been trying to avoid. But it would also mean getting expert perspective from someone who might actually understand what he was dealing with. The creature had chosen to reveal itself. It had engaged in communication. Maybe it was time to bring in someone who could help interpret what that communication meant. Jake started typing an email, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. How do you explain something like this without sounding completely insane? Finally, he settled on something simple and direct. Dr. Martinez, my name is Jake Anderson. I'm a lifelong hunter and outdoorsman in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. 3 days ago, I recovered trail camera footage that I believe you would find significant. I'm not a crank or a hoaxer. I'm someone with 37 years of backcountry experience who has documented something that defies my understanding of local wildlife. If you're interested, I'm willing to share the footage under conditions we can discuss. I have reasons for maintaining confidentiality, but I believe what I've recorded represents evidence you've been looking for. Jake Anderson. He added his phone number, then hesitated for a long moment before clicking send. The email disappeared into the void of the internet, and Jake immediately wondered if he'd just made a huge mistake. He closed his laptop and walked out onto the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the absence of light pollution. Somewhere in the darkness, the mountains held secrets that he was only beginning to understand. Jake thought about the creature's face, about the intelligence in those dark eyes, about the careful demonstration of capability and the measured communication through the rock circle. Whatever happened next, things had changed permanently. He was no longer just a hunter in these mountains. He was now part of something larger, something that had been hidden in shadow for generations. The creature had chosen him for reasons he didn't fully understand. Now he had to figure out what that choice meant and how to honor the trust that had been placed in him. The mountains stretched endlessly toward the horizon, holding their secrets close. But Jake now knew those secrets had names and faces and intelligence that exceeded anything in his experience. And somewhere out there in the darkness, they were watching, waiting to see what he would do next. The email response came faster than Jake expected. He woke up the next morning to find a message waiting in his inbox, time-stamped at 6:43 a.m. Mr. Anderson, I'm very interested in what you've documented. I can be in Missoula by tomorrow evening if you're willing to meet. I understand the need for discretion and will respect whatever boundaries you set. I've been researching this phenomenon for 15 years, and credible evidence is rare. If what you've recorded is genuine, it could represent a significant advancement in our understanding. Please call me at the number below. We should discuss this directly. Dr. Sarah Martinez. Jake stared at the message for a long time, coffee growing cold in his hand. This was real now. He was actually doing this. He picked up his phone and dialed before he could talk himself out of it. She answered on the second ring. Dr. Martinez, this is Jake Anderson. From Montana. Mr. Anderson. Her voice was warm but professional, with just a hint of excitement underneath. Thank you for reaching out. Can you tell me more about what you've recorded? Jake took a breath. Before I get into details, I need to know this stays confidential. I'm not looking for publicity or attention. I just need to understand what I'm dealing with. I completely understand. I work with dozens of witnesses who require anonymity. Nothing you share with me will be made public without your explicit permission. Okay. Jake walked to his window, looking out at the mountains. I have 33 minutes of HD trail camera footage, showing a large bipedal creature, taking down and completely processing an 800-pound elk. The detail is clear. The behavior is sophisticated. And the creature knew it was being filmed. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, you're serious. I wish I wasn't. Can you send me the footage? I'd rather show you in person. If you're coming to Missoula anyway. Another pause. I can be there tomorrow night. Is that too soon? No, Jake said. The sooner the better. I've got questions that aren't going to answer themselves. They arranged to meet at Jake's cabin. Dr. Martinez would fly into Missoula, rent a car, and drive out the next evening. Jake gave her detailed directions, emphasizing that the last few miles were on rough Forest Service roads that would require careful navigation in the dark. After he hung up, Jake spent the rest of the day second-guessing his decision. Was he betraying the creature's trust by sharing the footage? Or was this exactly what the creature wanted for someone with authority and credibility to witness the evidence? The rock circle and the raven feather suggested the creature was open to communication. Maybe bringing in an expert was the next logical step in whatever dialogue had been initiated. Or maybe Jake was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. He cleaned the cabin obsessively, a nervous habit he'd developed years ago, swept the floors, organized his research materials, made sure he had enough food to offer a guest. Not that Dr. Martinez was coming for a social visit, but Jake's grandmother had raised him with certain standards about hospitality. That night, he returned to the rock circle. The journey was familiar now, his feet finding the trail even in darkness. He'd made this hike so many times over the years that his body knew the way without conscious thought. But tonight felt different, heavier with significance. Jake reached the cluster of granite boulders and stood looking at the arrangement. The raven feather was still there, exactly where he'd found it. He crouched down and carefully repositioned the stones, reforming the circle and placing the feather back in the center. Then he added something of his own, a small compass that his grandfather had given him when he was 12. Not expensive, just a basic brass compass with a leather strap, but it had been with him on every hunting trip for 37 years. "I'm bringing someone tomorrow," Jake said to the empty darkness. "A scientist. Someone who might understand what you're trying to communicate. I hope that's okay." The forest remained silent, but Jake sensed something in that silence. Not emptiness, but attention. The kind of quiet that comes when someone is listening carefully. He stood there for several more minutes, then made his way back to his truck. The next day dragged. Jake tried to keep himself busy, but found his attention constantly wandering. He checked his email obsessively, half expecting Dr. Martinez to cancel. He reviewed the footage again, looking for details he might have missed. He paced his cabin like a caged animal. Finally, just after 7 p.m., headlights appeared on the road leading to his property. Dr. Sarah Martinez was not what Jake had expected. He'd pictured a stereotypical academic, middle-aged, formal, maybe a bit stuffy. Instead, the woman who climbed out of the rental SUV looked to be in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and hiking boots that had seen serious use. She wore jeans and a fleece jacket, and her handshake was firm. "Mr. Anderson, thank you for having me." "Jake, please, come on in." She followed him into the cabin, her eyes taking in everything with the observational intensity of someone trained to notice details. She didn't comment on the rustic accommodations, just set down her backpack and waited. "Coffee?" Jake offered. "That would be great, thank you." He poured 2 mugs while she settled at the kitchen table. When he sat down across from her, she pulled out a small notebook and pen. "Before you show me the footage," she said, "tell me about your background, your experience in these mountains." Jake gave her the condensed version. 37 years, hunting and guiding, expert-level tracking skills. Knowledge of local wildlife that came from thousands of hours of observation. He didn't embellish or exaggerate, just stated facts. Dr. Martinez took notes, nodding occasionally. "And you've never seen anything like this before?" "Never. I've seen every predator in these mountains. Bear, mountain lion, wolves back when they first got reintroduced. This is different." "Different? How?" "It's intelligent. Not animal intelligent. Human intelligent. Maybe more. It understands tools, planning, evidence. It knows how to avoid detection." Jake paused. "And I think it wanted me to find this footage." Dr. Martinez's pen stopped moving. "Why do you think that?" "Because of what happened after." Jake told her about finding the camera missing, about the SD card placed deliberately on the boulder, about returning to the site and finding the rock arrangements and the raven feather. "May I see the feather?" Jake retrieved it from his desk drawer and handed it over. Dr. Martinez examined it carefully, holding it up to the light. "This is fresh, less than a week old." She looked at Jake. "You said there was a pattern in the rock placement." "Yeah. Let me show you the photos." He pulled up the images on his laptop, and Dr. Martinez studied them intently. Her expression shifted from professional interest to something more intense. "This is remarkable," she said quietly. "I've documented similar arrangements in Washington and Northern California. Always in remote areas, always placed where they'd eventually be found by humans. The pattern suggests intentional communication. Communication about what? That's the question." Dr. Martinez sat back. "The prevailing theory among those of us who take this seriously is that there's an ongoing debate within their population about whether to reveal themselves to humanity. Some want isolation. Others believe it's time for contact. These arrangements might be overtures from the latter group. Testing the waters," Jake said. "Exactly. Seeing how humans respond to evidence of their presence." She looked at him carefully. "Which brings us to your footage. May I see it?" Jake turned the laptop toward her and opened the video file. "It's intense. Fair warning. I've spent 15 years studying this phenomenon. Jake, I'm prepared." He clicked play and watched her face as the footage began. Dr. Martinez remained perfectly still for the first minute, her expression neutral. Then the creature attacked the elk, and Jake saw her breath catch. "My God," she whispered. She didn't speak again for the next 33 minutes. Jake had seen the footage dozens of times by now, but watching someone else experience it for the first time brought back the visceral shock of his initial viewing. When the creature looked directly into the camera at the end, Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her face inches from the screen. When the image went black, she sat back slowly. "Jake," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "do you understand what you have here? Something that'll turn my life upside down, if it gets out." "No," she shook her head. "You have proof. Unambiguous, undeniable proof of a species that science has refused to acknowledge. The detail, the clarity, the length of the footage, this changes everything. That's what I'm afraid of." Dr. Martinez looked at him. "What do you want to do with this?" "I don't know. That's why I called you." Jake rubbed his face. "Part of me says this is too important to keep secret. Another part says that creature chose to show me this for a reason, and maybe that reason is to stay hidden. The creature took down an elk with its bare hands, processed it with skills that would take a human decades to master, and then looked directly at your camera for 30 seconds. That's not the behavior of something trying to stay hidden. Then what is it? A declaration." Dr. Martinez replayed the final section, pausing on the frame where the creature stared into the lens. "Look at its expression. That's not aggression or fear. It's assessment. Maybe even invitation." Jake studied the frozen image. He'd looked at this frame 100 times, but hearing Dr. Martinez's interpretation made him see it differently. "You think it wants contact? I think it wants to see if contact is possible. If humans can be trusted with knowledge of their existence." She turned to Jake. "And you've been chosen as the test case. That was a hell of a responsibility." They talked late into the night, Dr. Martinez sharing 15 years of accumulated research, while Jake made notes and asked questions. She told him about other witnesses, about patterns in sightings, about evidence that suggested a population of several thousand individuals spread across the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies. "They're incredibly good at remaining hidden," she explained. "They understand human behavior, recognize our technology, and actively avoid detection. The few sightings that do occur are usually when they choose to be seen or when circumstances force an encounter, like my trail camera." "Exactly. You put that camera in what was probably a regularly used hunting corridor." The creature had 3 choices: avoid the area completely, try to sneak past the camera, or engage with it directly. It chose engagement. "Why?" Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. "I think they're watching the world change, seeing forests cut down, seeing climate change affect their habitat, seeing human expansion into what used to be remote wilderness. Maybe some of them have decided that remaining completely hidden isn't sustainable anymore. So they're reaching out, carefully, slowly, testing to see if humanity is ready for the truth." Jake thought about the rock arrangements, about the deliberate communication through symbols. What happens if we screw this up? They go back into hiding, probably forever. Dr. Martinez met his eyes. "That's why this needs to be handled very carefully. The wrong kind of attention, media circuses, trophy hunters, government intervention, could destroy any chance of establishing trust. Then what's the right kind of attention? I don't know yet, but I think the next step is yours to take. You're the one they contacted. You need to respond in a way that shows you understand the significance of what they've shared." Jake nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about going back to the site, leaving another message." "What kind of message?" "Something that shows I'm not a threat, that I'm trying to understand." Dr. Martinez considered this. "What if I came with you?" Another human showing peaceful intent might reinforce the message, or it might spook them. "They reached out to me specifically." "Fair point." She closed her notebook. "But I'd like to at least accompany you to the general area. Document the site, look for additional sign. I'll stay back from any direct communication attempt." Jake thought about it. Having an expert present might help him interpret whatever response the creatures provided, and Dr. Martinez had proven herself trustworthy so far. "Okay," he said, "we'll go tomorrow morning, early." They left before dawn, Jake's truck bouncing along the rough road as the sky lightened from black to grey. Dr. Martinez had come prepared with professional camera equipment, a field journal, and a backpack full of supplies that suggested she'd spent serious time in backcountry conditions. The hike to the camera site took 2 hours, both of them moving quietly and observing everything around them. Dr. Martinez kept stopping to photograph tracks, scat, broken vegetation, building a comprehensive record of the area's wildlife activity. When they reached the granite boulders, Jake gestured for Dr. Martinez to hang back. She nodded and positioned herself about 50 yards away, giving him space but staying close enough to observe. Jake approached the rock circle slowly. His grandfather's compass was gone. In its place, arranged with obvious care, was a collection of objects that made his breath catch. 3 perfect arrowheads made from black obsidian, ancient-looking and expertly knapped. A section of elk antler, carved with geometric patterns, and a small bundle of dried plants, tied with sinew. Jake knelt beside the arrangement, his hands shaking slightly. This wasn't just acknowledgement, this was reciprocal gift-giving. The creature had responded to his offering with offerings of its own. He carefully photographed everything from multiple angles, then looked up at the surrounding forest. "Thank you," he said clearly. "I understand what you're sharing, and I want you to know. I'm not here to hurt you or expose you. I just want to understand." The forest remained silent, but Jake felt that same sense of attention he'd experienced before. Something was listening. He added his own gift to the collection, a small leather pouch containing tobacco, a traditional offering he remembered from his grandfather's stories about showing respect in sacred places. Then he stood and backed away slowly, giving the site space. Dr. Martinez approached carefully, her eyes wide as she examined the objects. "Jake," she breathed, "these arrowheads are prehistoric, probably thousands of years old, and the antler carving, that's a level of craftsmanship that requires tools and skill and time. What does it mean? It means they have history, culture. They're not just surviving in these mountains, they're preserving something that goes back further than we can imagine." She photographed everything meticulously. "This is incredible." They spent the next several hours searching the surrounding area, finding more evidence of structured activity. A shelter woven from branches and bark, perfectly camouflaged and positioned to overlook the valley. A cache site where food had been stored in a way that kept it protected from scavengers. A series of territorial markers that formed a clear boundary around what was obviously prime hunting territory. "This is sophisticated land management," Dr. Martinez said as she documented each find. "They're not just wandering through randomly. They have territories, hunting grounds, seasonal camps. This is a functioning ecosystem with apex predators that we never knew existed." Around noon, they stopped for lunch on a granite outcrop with a view of the valley. Dr. Martinez pulled out her field journal and began organizing her notes. "I need to ask you something," she said. "What do you want from this? Long term, I mean." Jake chewed his sandwich slowly, thinking, "Honestly, I just want to be left alone to live my life. But now that I know they're here, I can't unknow it. And I keep thinking about that look the creature gave the camera. It showed me something important. I feel like I owe it a response." "What kind of response?" "Respect, distance, maybe coexistence without interference." Dr. Martinez nodded. "That might be exactly what they're looking for. Acknowledgement without intrusion. But you want more than that, don't you? You want to study them." She was quiet for a moment. "I want to understand them. There's a difference. Study implies treating them as subjects. Understanding means treating them as equals." She looked at Jake. "I've spent my entire career preparing for this moment, concrete evidence that they exist. But now that I have it, I realize the evidence isn't the point. The relationship is. So what do? We take our cues from them. They initiated contact. We respond respectfully. We see where it leads." She closed her journal. "And we protect them from the wrong kind of attention in the meantime." They hiked back to Jake's truck in late afternoon, both of them processing what they'd seen. The drive back was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. At the cabin, Dr. Martinez began packing her equipment. "I need to head back to Portland tomorrow, but I'd like to stay in touch. Keep me updated on any developments. You're not going to publish anything about this, not without your permission, and not in a way that would compromise the location or the creature's safety. But Jake, eventually this story needs to be told. In the right way, to the right audience. Maybe, but not yet." "Agreed." "Not yet." She handed him a card with multiple contact numbers. "Call me anytime, day or night. If something develops, I want to know." After she left the next morning, Jake spent a week processing everything that had happened. He reviewed the footage again and again, studied the photos of the artifacts, read and reread Dr. Martinez's notes and the research papers she'd shared with him. The more he learned, the more he realized how little anyone truly understood about what was living in these mountains. But he also felt something shifting in himself. The initial shock and fear had given way to something else. Not quite acceptance, but maybe recognition. These creatures were part of the ecosystem, part of the mountains he loved. They'd been here long before him and would be here long after. Learning to coexist with them wasn't just possible, it was necessary. On the 8th day after Dr. Martinez left, Jake returned to the rock circle one more time. The tobacco pouch was gone. In its place, laid out with careful precision, was a map. Not a modern map, but something older, carved into a flat piece of slate with obvious skill and care. Jake picked it up carefully, studying the markings. It showed the valley where his cabin was located, represented by a series of lines that indicated topography, ridgelines, water sources, significant landmarks, but it also showed things that weren't on any official map, areas marked with specific symbols that Jake didn't understand, routes that avoided human trails, places that were clearly marked as significant, and right in the center, a symbol that could only represent Jake's cabin. Next to it, a small mark that might have been a human figure. They knew where he lived, had probably known for years. The realization should have been terrifying. Instead, Jake felt an odd sense of comfort. If they'd wanted to harm him, they'd had countless opportunities. The map wasn't a threat. It was an acknowledgement of his place in the landscape, and maybe, just maybe, it was an invitation to understand their place as well. Jake spent the rest of the day studying the map, comparing it to his own topographical maps and GPS data. Some of the marked areas were places he'd never explored, steep terrain that he'd always assumed was too difficult to access. Others were locations he knew well, but had never noticed anything unusual. One symbol in particular caught his attention. It was marked in a high alpine basin about 6 miles northeast of his cabin, in an area he'd only visited a handful of times. The symbol was repeated 3 times, suggesting it was particularly significant. Jake made a decision. The next morning, he loaded his pack with several days' worth of supplies and set out for the alpine basin. The hike was brutal 6 miles as the crow flies, but more like 9 or 10 with the elevation gain and difficult terrain. He climbed through pine forest, across granite talus slopes, and finally up into the basin itself. What he found there stopped him in his tracks. The basin was pristine, surrounded by peaks on 3 sides, and open to the south with a view that stretched for 50 miles. A small alpine lake sat in the center, fed by snowmelt from the surrounding ridges. The whole area felt isolated, protected, like a sanctuary, and throughout the basin, Jake found evidence of structured occupation. Not crude shelters or primitive camps, but something far more sophisticated. Dwellings constructed from stone and timber, perfectly camouflaged and positioned to blend with the natural landscape. Each structure was different, adapted to its specific location, but all showed the same level of skill and planning. This wasn't a temporary hunting camp. This was a permanent settlement. Jake moved through the area slowly, documenting everything but touching nothing. He counted 12 distinct structures, plus what appeared to be common areas for food processing and tool making. The scale suggested a population of 30 to 40 individuals at minimum, and the most stunning part, Some of these structures showed signs of age, decades, maybe centuries of use and maintenance. Stones worn smooth by countless hands, timbers carefully replaced over generations. This place had been occupied for a very, very long time. Jake found a rock outcrop overlooking the settlement and sat down, his mind reeling. He'd spent 37 years in these mountains and never suspected that an entire community was living just 6 miles from his cabin. How many others were there? How many settlements like this existed in remote basins and hidden valleys throughout the Rockies? As he sat there processing the implications, Jake noticed movement near one of the structures. A figure emerged, massive, dark-furred, moving with that same graceful economy of motion he'd seen in the footage. Then another, and another. Within minutes, Jake counted 7 individuals, ranging from what appeared to be adults to smaller figures that might have been juveniles. They moved about the settlement going about their daily activities, processing food, working on repairs to structures, interacting with each other in ways that suggested complex social organization. Jake watched a pair of adults teaching 2 juveniles what appeared to be tool-making techniques, the younger ones mimicking the precise hand movements with focused concentration. This was culture. This was civilization. And Jake had just walked right into the middle of it. He should have been terrified. 7 creatures, each capable of taking down an 800-pound elk with their bare hands, and him sitting exposed on a rock outcrop with no cover and nowhere to run. But nobody seemed threatened by his presence. The creatures went about their business, occasionally glancing in his direction but making no aggressive moves. It was almost as if they'd been expecting him. Of course they had. The map. The map had been an invitation. Jake sat perfectly still for over an hour, just watching. Eventually, one of the adult figures broke away from the group and began walking toward his position, slowly, deliberately, giving Jake plenty of time to see it coming. The creature stopped about 20 feet away and looked at Jake with those same dark, intelligent eyes he'd seen in the footage. Up close, the sheer size was breathtaking. 9 feet tall easily, maybe more. Shoulders broader than any human, arms that hung to its knees, hands that could crush bone like twigs. But the face held no aggression, just calm evaluation and what might have been curiosity. Jake's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, but he forced himself to remain calm. He slowly raised one hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful greeting. The creature tilted its head slightly, studying the gesture. Then, with deliberate care, it raised its own hand and mimicked the movement. Holy shit! They stayed like that for several seconds. 2 intelligent beings from completely different worlds, acknowledging each other across a divide that had existed for thousands of years. Then the creature reached into a pouch at its side. Jake hadn't even noticed it was carrying something and pulled out an object. It set the object on the ground between them, then stepped back. Jake waited to make sure the creature wasn't moving closer, then carefully approached the object. It was another carved piece of slate, smaller than the map, but with even more intricate detail. This one showed not the landscape, but something else: figures. Human figures and creature figures, standing together in what appeared to be some kind of gathering or meeting. Jake looked up at the creature. "You want us to meet? Officially?" The creature didn't respond verbally, but something in its expression suggested it understood the question. It gestured toward the carved image, then toward Jake, then back toward the settlement. The message was clear. This isn't just about you. This is about our peoples finding a way forward. Jake carefully picked up the carved slate and nodded. "I understand, but I need time. This is huge." The creature waited for a moment longer, then turned and walked back toward the settlement. Jake watched it go, his mind spinning with implications and possibilities and responsibilities he had no idea how to handle. He stayed in the basin until dusk, documenting everything he could while maintaining respectful distance. The creatures went about their evening routines preparing food, tending to what appeared to be a communal fire that was producing almost no visible smoke. settling into their shelters as darkness fell. It was a community, a functioning, thriving community that had existed alongside human civilization for generations without anyone knowing. The hike back to his cabin took Jake well into the night, his headlamp illuminating the trail as his mind raced through everything he'd witnessed. By the time he stumbled into his cabin at 2 a.m, he was exhausted but too wired to sleep. He called Dr. Martinez. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Jake, what's wrong?" "Sarah, I found them. I found their settlement. There are families, kids, an entire community living 6 miles from my cabin." Silence. "Then, tell me everything." Jake talked for over an hour, describing the basin, the structures, the encounter with the adult creature, the carved slate with the image of humans and creatures together. Dr. Martinez listened without interrupting, occasionally making soft sounds of amazement or disbelief. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Jake," she finally said, "do you understand what this means? They're not just intelligent animals. They're a parallel society. They have culture, language, art, social structures, everything that defines civilization. I know, and they want contact. They want to establish some kind of formal relationship with humanity. That's what the carving suggests. She trailed off. This is the most significant anthropological discovery in human history. This changes everything we understand about intelligence, evolution, civilization itself, which is exactly why it terrifies me," Jake said. "Because the moment this goes public, those creatures lose any chance at the peaceful existence they've maintained for thousands of years. Scientists will descend on them. The government will get involved. Trophy hunters will try to bag one for their collection. Their whole world will be destroyed. So what do we do? I have no idea. That's why I called you." Dr. Martinez was quiet again, thinking. "We need more information. We need to understand what they want from this contact, what terms they're proposing, whether they have representatives who can speak for their entire population. How do I ask them that? You go back. You bring them a response that shows you understand the significance of their offer, and you try to establish a dialogue that can lead to mutual understanding. Just like that. Jake, you're already doing it. They chose you because you approached them with respect, rather than fear or aggression. You've proven you can be trusted. Now you need to figure out how to be a bridge between two intelligent species that have been hiding from each other for millennia. No pressure or anything." Jake spent the next 3 days preparing for his return to the basin. He gathered supplies, studied every piece of information he'd collected, and tried to think through how to communicate complex concepts to beings who didn't share his language. Finally, he decided simplicity was best. He would bring gifts that demonstrated his understanding of their culture and his respect for their civilization, tools that might be useful, food that could be shared, and something symbolic, a carving of his own, made with his own hands, showing the same scene they'd shown him, humans and creatures standing together. Jake had never been much of an artist, but he spent 12 hours carefully carving an image into a piece of wood he'd found near his cabin. The detail wasn't as refined as what the creature had created, but the message was clear. He understood. He was willing to try. On the 4th day, Jake returned to the basin. The hike was easier this time, his body remembering the route, and his mind less overwhelmed by shock and discovery. He reached the basin in late afternoon and found a spot on the same outcrop where he'd watched before. He didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, the same adult creature emerged from the settlement and walked toward his position, but this time, it wasn't alone. 2 other adults followed, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly there as support or witnesses. The lead creature stopped at the same spot as before and waited. Jake stood slowly, his heart pounding, but his resolve steady. He walked forward until he was standing face to face, or rather, face to chest, with the massive being. Up close, he could see details he'd missed before. The creature's hair wasn't just matted and dark, but showed hints of auburn in the sunlight. Its eyes weren't just intelligent, but kind. There were scars on its arms and hands, evidence of a life lived in the wilderness, and there was something in its expression that Jake recognized the same weariness that came from carrying responsibilities too large for one individual. Jake carefully set down his pack and pulled out the carved wood. He held it up so the creature could see the image he'd created, then extended it as an offering. The creature studied the carving for a long moment, then gently took it with surprising delicacy. It examined Jake's work carefully, running its fingers over the carved lines, and Jake could have sworn he saw approval in its expression. Then the creature reached out slowly, giving Jake plenty of time to pull back if he wanted, and placed one massive hand on Jake's shoulder. The touch was gentle, almost tentative, a gesture of connection, of recognition. Jake felt tears prick his eyes and blinked them back. This was real. This was happening. Two species, separated by millions of years of evolution, finding common ground through nothing more than respect and willingness to try. The creature withdrew its hand and gestured for Jake to follow. The other two adults fell into step behind them as they walked toward the settlement. Jake had no idea what would happen next, but he followed anyway. Because sometimes the only way forward is to trust that intelligence and good faith exist on both sides of an impossible divide. The settlement was even more impressive up close. Jake was led to what appeared to be a central gathering area, a cleared space surrounded by carefully placed stones that created natural seating. Several more creatures emerged from the structures, moving to join the group. Jake counted 14 individuals total, ranging from what appeared to be elders with graying hair to juveniles who watched with wide-eyed curiosity. The lead creature gestured for Jake to sit, then settled across from him. The others arranged themselves in a loose circle, creating the same configuration Jake had seen in the carvings: a meeting, a council. For the next several hours, Jake experienced something that defied easy explanation. It wasn't quite language, but it wasn't quite pantomime either. The creatures communicated through a combination of gestures, sounds, and what Jake could only describe as projected intent. Somehow, despite having no shared vocabulary, concepts were exchanged. They showed him their history. Through a series of carved images and careful demonstrations, the creatures revealed that their people had once been much more numerous, spread across the entire North American continent. But as human populations expanded, they'd retreated to increasingly remote areas, adapting their behavior to avoid contact. They showed him the cost of that isolation. Communities separated from each other, unable to safely travel between territories. Knowledge being lost as elders died without enough young people to teach. The slow erosion of their culture, under the pressure of hiding. And they showed him their hope, that humanity had reached a level of development where coexistence might be possible. That some humans, people like Jake, could be trusted with the knowledge of their existence. In return, Jake shared what he could about human society, the complexity, the diversity, the capacity for both great good and terrible destruction. He tried to convey the challenges that would come with revelation, the attention, the fear, the inevitable conflict from some quarters. But he also tried to convey possibility, that there were humans who would view this discovery with wonder rather than fear. Scientists like Dr. Martinez, who'd spent careers preparing for this moment. People who believed in protecting wilderness and respecting other forms of intelligence. The exchange lasted until well after dark, lit by the creature's carefully managed fire. By the end, Jake felt like he understood, maybe not the details, but the essential truth. These beings wanted what any intelligent species wanted: to exist safely, to preserve their culture, to have a future for their children. And they were willing to take the enormous risk of revealing themselves to achieve it. As the gathering wound down, the lead creature presented Jake with one final gift: a small pendant carved from bone, showing the symbol for what Jake interpreted as friend or ally. It was placed around his neck with ceremonial care, witnessed by the entire group. Jake removed his grandfather's hunting knife, the one he'd carried for 37 years, and offered it in return. The blade was old but well maintained, the handle worn smooth by decades of use. It represented his own history, his own connection to these mountains. The creature accepted it with what was unmistakably reverence, understanding the significance of the exchange. When Jake finally left the basin that night, he carried with him the weight of impossible responsibility. He'd been chosen, or had chosen himself, to serve as a bridge between two intelligent species at a moment of potential historic significance. The question was whether he was up to the task. Over the following weeks, Jake made several more trips to the basin, each time learning more, sharing more, building trust and understanding. Dr. Martinez joined him on 2 occasions, her scientific expertise helping to document and interpret what they were witnessing. Together, they began developing a plan, not for public revelation. Everyone agreed that needed to wait until the creatures were ready, but for gradual contact with carefully selected individuals who could help establish a framework for future coexistence. Conservationists who could help protect habitat. Anthropologists who could document culture with respect rather than exploitation. Legal experts who could explore the question of rights and sovereignty for a previously unknown intelligent species. It would take years, maybe decades. But for the first time in thousands of years, 2 intelligent species were actively working toward mutual understanding rather than hiding from each other. Jake's life transformed in ways he never could have anticipated. His cabin became a way station of sorts, a neutral ground where occasional meetings could occur. He learned to communicate more effectively with the creatures, picking up their gestural language and beginning to understand the subtle sounds that carried meaning. He also learned their name for themselves, or at least the closest approximation his human vocal cords could manage. It sounded something like Ahani, which Jake understood to mean the people of the forest or something similar. The Ahani, for their part, proved to be patient teachers and generous hosts. They shared knowledge of plants and animals that predated modern science by thousands of years. They demonstrated sustainable hunting practices that put human conservation efforts to shame. They revealed a sophisticated understanding of ecology and environmental balance that came from millennia of careful observation. And gradually, carefully, they began introducing Jake to other communities. The basin settlement wasn't alone. There were others scattered throughout the Rockies, from Montana down through Wyoming and Colorado, a whole network of communities that had been living in the shadows of human civilization, watching and waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. That moment, it seemed, had finally come. 6 months after Jake first viewed the trail camera footage, he stood on his cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Dr. Martinez sat beside him, reviewing notes from their latest meeting with the Ahani Council. "We're going to need more people eventually," she said. "This is too big for just the 2 of us to coordinate." "I know," Jake replied, "but we need to be careful about who we bring in." "Agreed. Every person needs to be vetted, needs to understand the stakes." Jake nodded, his hand unconsciously touching the bone pendant at his neck. "You know what keeps me up at night? The thought that we might screw this up, that we'll make the wrong call and cause exactly the kind of disaster we're trying to prevent. That's why we move slowly. Why we let the Ahani set the pace." Dr. Martinez closed her notebook. "They've survived for thousands of years by being cautious. We need to respect that." "Yeah." Jake took a sip of his coffee. "Still feels like trying to defuse a bomb while riding a unicycle. Blindfolded." Dr. Martinez laughed. "That's oddly specific. I've had a lot of time to think about it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the mountains settle into darkness. Somewhere in those mountains, the Ahani were going about their evening routines, preparing for winter, teaching their children, maintaining the delicate balance they'd achieved between remaining hidden and preparing for eventual revelation. And Jake, a simple hunter who'd thought he understood these mountains, found himself at the center of something far larger than he'd ever imagined. A story that had been unfolding for thousands of years, now reaching a critical moment where the choices made by a few individuals could reshape the relationship between 2 intelligent species. No pressure or anything, but as Jake sat there in the gathering darkness, feeling the weight of the bone pendant against his chest, and remembering the gentle touch of a massive hand on his shoulder, he realized something important. He wasn't alone in this. None of them were. The Ahani had been watching and waiting for generations, identifying humans who might be ready for this knowledge. They'd chosen Jake not randomly, but deliberately, because they'd seen in him something worth trusting. And maybe, just maybe, that trust was the beginning of something that could grow into genuine understanding. The mountains stretched endlessly toward the horizon, holding secrets that were slowly being revealed. The trail camera footage that had started everything sat encrypted on multiple drives, evidence of a reality that most of humanity still couldn't imagine. But Jake knew the truth now, knew that intelligence came in forms that science had dismissed, knew that the wilderness held civilizations that had learned to live in balance with nature in ways humans had forgotten, knew that the line between human and other was far more blurred than anyone wanted to admit, and he knew that the creature who'd looked into his camera 6 months ago had understood exactly what it was doing. It had been testing not just Jake, but all of humanity, asking a question that every human would eventually have to answer. Could we share this world with another intelligent species? Could we move past fear and greed and the impulse to dominate? Could we recognize intelligence and grant it the respect and autonomy it deserved? Jake didn't know if humanity as a whole was ready for those questions, but he knew he was going to do everything in his power to make sure that when the time came, the answer was yes. The creature had taken down that elk with its bare hands, had processed it with skills that took humans lifetimes to master, had looked into the camera with intelligence that demanded recognition, and then it had offered Jake a gift, the chance to be part of something unprecedented in human history, the chance to build bridges instead of walls. Jake finished his coffee and stood, ready to head inside for the night. Dr. Martinez gathered her notes, preparing to make the drive back to Missoula. Same time next week? She asked. Yeah. The Ahani want to discuss expanding the contact circle, bringing in a couple more people they've been watching. Any idea who? A park ranger out of Yellowstone, from what I understand, and maybe a wildlife biologist working in the Cascade Range. People in positions to help protect their territory without drawing unwanted attention. Dr. Martinez smiled. The network grows. Slowly, carefully. That's the only way it can work. After she left, Jake stood alone on his porch for a while longer, listening to the night sounds of the mountains. An owl called in the distance. Wind sighed through the pines. Somewhere far off, a coyote sang its lonely song. And underlying it all, Jake sensed the presence of watchers in the darkness. The Ahani, observing and evaluating and waiting to see what humanity would do with the knowledge they'd shared. Jake touched the pendant at his neck one more time, then headed inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new responsibilities. But tonight, he could rest knowing that something impossible had become real, that somewhere in the darkness, two intelligent species were learning slowly, carefully, with infinite patience how to coexist. The trail camera had captured 33 minutes of footage, but the real story was just beginning. And Jake Anderson, hunter and outdoorsman and accidental ambassador, was ready to see where it led. The mountains held their secrets close, but not forever. The time for hiding was ending. The time for understanding was beginning. And maybe, just maybe, humanity was finally ready for the truth.